start.
So sorry, so sorry. Go here, go that little arrow.
Good evening, and welcome to the inaugural presidential town hall meeting here in Exeter, New Hampshire. And tonight, it looks like we're going to have a excellent, intimate conversation with one of the candidates for the Republican presidential nomination. My name is Howard Altschuler. I'm the executive editor of Seacoast Media Group. We publish the Exeter newsletter here in Exeter. We have a major fan, thank you. The Hampton Union, the Portsmouth Herald, and Foster's Daily Democrat. The website's Seacoast Online and Fosters.com. This space that we're in tonight and the New Hampshire primary itself are steeped in history. Abraham Lincoln, the very first Republican president, spoke in this very spot. And it was 1860. He had just come back from New York, and he'd just come back from New York, and Cooper Union had given a anti-slavery speech. And in March, he spoke here before launching his presidential campaign, went on to be a very successful presidential campaign. He was followed by, in more recent years, Bob Dole has spoken here, John McCain has spoken here, Donald Trump spoke here, Mitt Romney spoke here. In fact, I saw Mitt Romney, I was sitting right over there. And so there have been a lot of Republican candidates who have come through here, a lot of Republicans who became president. Why did they become to Exeter? Because Exeter is the birthplace of the Republican Party. A good friend of Abraham Lincoln's from Congress, Amos Tuck, lived here in Exeter, and he set up a meeting, brought together a bunch of like-minded citizens, folks who didn't want to see the expansion of slavery, and they began working and creating a new political party that eventually became the Republican Party. The primary itself celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2020, and the first Republican primary in 1920 grew out of a reform effort. It's the same reform effort that gave women the right to vote, the same reform effort that led to the direct election of U.S. senators. And by being here tonight, by participating in the primary, you will become part of that great history. The First in the Nation primary has endured for 100 years because it works. No amount of televised debates, television ads, direct mailers, social media can match the raw power of a conversation between a candidate and a voter. And there's nothing more real than a story or a question spoken from the heart by a voter to a candidate who is really listening and understands and has the ability to act upon that. And we've seen that happen time and time again. So we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being here. Tonight, let's keep our conversation. I have no doubt that with this very civil crew that we'll keep our conversation civil. Let's keep it substantive. Let's do democracy right. You have on your chairs a survey, and if you could please fill it out. It basically asks you what's important to you about in this election. Your answers will help inform our coverage going forward. Also, please remember to silence your cell phones, and I know we often forget to do that, and I appreciate you doing that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator tonight, who's going to introduce our special guest candidate, and Francesca Chambers is the Francesca is the White House correspondent for USA Today. And Francesca, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and thank you to everyone at home who is watching tonight as well. Here's how things are going to work. First, Governor Hutchinson is going to deliver opening remarks. Then I'm going to kick us off with a question, and then we're going to toss it over to you. This is about you. This is about the voter. We want to hear from you tonight. Governor Hutchinson will be calling on you. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and one of our mic runners, who are there, and there, will come over to you with the microphone as well. I have to remind you again to please silence your cell phones. But with that, let's bring him on out. Governor Hutchinson.
Thank you. Hey, Francesca.
Thanks so much for being here. A quick introduction, although you need no introduction in this state, I'm sure. He is a former two-term governor of Arkansas. He left office earlier this year. He also served in the United States Congress. He was a Bush administration official. During that time, he served as DEA administrator. Thank you again for being here tonight, sir. Go ahead, your opening remarks, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesca, and I want to recognize Howard for both hosting this, but also for your reciting of history earlier. And I like the story of Abraham Lincoln because Abraham Lincoln ran in 1858 for the United States Senate in Illinois, and he lost. 2 years later, the nation turned to him and said, "We need you during this time." And I think that's emblematic of where we are today, where we have a nation that has its challenges. And I'm running for president because I believe we need new leadership. And obviously, I disagree with President Biden's policies in many ways, and that's why I'm running. But also, I believe we need a course correction within the Republican Party and go a different direction as well. And so that's why I'm running for president. You know, I've really enjoyed being here in New Hampshire, and I was today at Manchester Central High School, and I was grilled by students. And so we'll see if you can live up to that reputation and experience that I had today. But I've met with folks here in New Hampshire, and they're concerned about the price of heating oil, concerned about the price of goods at the store. They're concerned about overregulation coming from Washington, D.C. that controls their lives. And that's why it's the live free or die state. And I hear those messages, and we need to have a pro-growth energy policy, which I will support as president. We need to control federal spending that impacts inflation, and we need to produce energy. But I also want to specifically tonight, in just a moment before we turn it over for questions, talk about what's happening in Israel. And I've thought a lot about it as you have, and our hearts go out, of course, for Israel, the Israelis, and the attack that they've experienced from Hamas, and they're going after them, and they should, and it's the right thing to do. But you know, I thought, isn't it great that Israel has a friend called the United States of America that can stand with them and can send the USS ship over there, Gerald Ford, and say, we're there to maintain the security of Israel. And that's the United States on the world stage. And I'm grateful for a country that stands by its allies and is there, that's strong enough, that can speak clearly and say, we're going to protect the interests of the United States, including those of our allies. And the reason I bring that up is that in this primary contest for president, there are those that want to more isolate the United States of America, both in terms of our national security, but also in terms of our economy. And I'll just say it, former President Donald Trump has proposed a ring around the United States. He has said that we need to have a 10% tariff on all goods that come into the United States of America, whether they come from a friend, ally, or adversary. 10% ring around the United States. The Tax Foundation says that would cost the American consumer $300 billion as a tax talking about inflation going out the roof. And he loves tariffs, and he has a history of that, and he believes that somehow the United States should be protected. Well, I believe that we ought to target those that do treat us unfairly, and that's how we ought to use tariffs. But no across-the-board tariffs. We don't need a ring around the United States. We are engaged internationally, and we need to do that. And so it's the wrong policy. It would cost us 500,000 jobs, and I believe that America can compete. You don't need to protect America. We can compete on the global stage, and we can win. And that's the America I believe in, that engages internationally, but also competes internationally. And I believe America's number one. We can keep it number one economically and militarily, and that's important. And so that's my opening comment. And understand that I believe in competition, I believe in winning, I believe in the private sector of our economy, and I believe in the strength of America. And that's the America that I stand for in this campaign. Thank you.
You're looking around, but I get the first one.
Go, good.
Okay. Governor, in a recent USA Today, Suffolk University, and Boston Globe poll, 1 in 4 New Hampshire voters said that either they or someone close to them had been addicted to opioids. You were the former DEA administrator. What would you do if you were elected president to curb the opioid crisis?
I would do 3 principal things. First of all, you've got to understand the importance of education. And so the town hall meetings like I had in Nashua, in which I had the chief of police there, and we talked about the fentanyl crisis, opioids, that was flooding their community. And even as I spoke, they texted me later that day and said their officers had seized a very large shipment of fentanyl coming to that community. I know the risk of it. A friend of mine, son, went to New York. He went to New York City to see a ball game. He made the mistake of going out, not a mistake, it was a bad judgment. And he went out on the streets of New York and he bought a Percocet pill. That Percocet pill was laced with fentanyl. He overdosed and he died that night. That's within the last year, and that can be mirrored, as you said in your statistic, Francesca, all across this country. Education is critical for our young people and for our young adults. Secondly, you got to have treatment. We have the opioid crisis in America started with the overprescription of pharmaceutical drugs and pain medication. That was a large part of it, and our heroin addicts switched to that, and then they've moved to fentanyl. But you've got to have treatment facilities that are expanded and available in our communities. And that's a joint federal and state responsibility, but let's have that treatment option. And the third one is probably just as important as all of them, and that is to make sure that we go after the cartels that are responsible for the importation, the bringing in of the fentanyl here in the United States of America that is killing the U.S. citizens. And we do that by partnering with Mexico. There's some candidates that say we ought to invade Mexico. Well, you know, we don't invade Canada because we got marijuana coming in. And so, you know, we don't invade Mexico. We work with them in partnership, but we have to make sure that they support the rule of law, just as I did as head of the DEA, met with President Vicente Fox. I said, I need your partnership to go after the Tijuana cartel. We worked together, shared intelligence, we trained, and he agreed. He said there are risks to us as well. And within a short amount of time, Ramon Ariana Felix, head of the Tijuana cartel, was shot and killed by the Mexican police. And Ben Amin, his brother, had been captured. Partnerships work. That's what we've got to do to stop that fentanyl from coming in.
Thank you. Now we will turn it over to you. As a reminder, if you have a question, please put up your hand and the governor will call on you and a mic runner will come over to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Hello again.
Yes,
saw
good to see you
yesterday.
again.
It's
That was
nice
a
to
fun
see you.
conversation we had.
Yes, it sure was. It was nice getting to know you outside of all these issues and know who the real you is. And I need to say that I'm just so happy to see all these young faces out here and experiencing the wonderful things that living in New Hampshire brings to you as far as candidate exposure. I'm here tonight representing AARP. I'm an advocacy volunteer there. New Hampshire, by population age, is the second oldest in the country. So we have a lot of concerns with some of the things that we're hearing about the solvency of Social Security. We have a vast number of granted staters here who largely depend seriously on Social Security as a significant portion of their income. If this proposed decrease of 20 to 25% that we're hearing about happens, these folks aren't going to be able to pay their property taxes and their homeowners insurances and those kinds of things that help to keep them in their homes. So if elected, what would you be doing to preserve the solvency and health of the Social Security system?
Thank you. Perfect question, because it's an urgent issue that we have to address as a nation. And you mentioned the young people. Actually, I was at Dartmouth talking to students, and I said, what's on your mind? Somebody said, whether Social Security is going to be here for me someday. So it is an issue that anybody that enters the workforce has to be concerned about. And so what I would propose is to address it in the same way that Ronald Reagan addressed it in 1983. He as soon as he was elected, he appointed a commission for the future of Medicare and Social Security. Alan Greenspan led that. It had bipartisan support and confidence. They made recommendations. Congress adopted it, and it sustained the life of those programs for decades and decades to where we are today. We can't solve this problem in a political campaign. And so it's one of the first things I will do as president is to support that commission, to make recommendations for the solvency, the strength of it, and the survivability of it for our citizens, whatever age they are. And then I would make sure that Congress adopted the recommendations to strengthen those programs. There's a lot of ideas that are out there, and all those ideas will be on the table that can be considered to strengthen those programs. And let me just add one more thing, if I might, about Social Security. And this will help our citizens that are retirement age. Right now, under federal law, if your age is 62 to 66 and you want to start taking Social Security benefits, you get penalized if you want to work. And we need people in our workforce. They're very talented. I don't want to make them work, but if they want to work, take the penalty off. Let the people work and have that choice. It helps our workforce. You have like, what, 1.9% unemployment rate here in New Hampshire. We can use that, so no sense penalizing them for working. I think that will help too. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for your leadership skills that you bring to the table and the manner in which you present them. My question for you today is, should the next House of Representatives have a similar makeup to what we have today? Without using presidential privilege, how would you approach them to get some of your initiatives forward?
If it was made up the same way it is today,
Right.
Wow. That's a close margin, and Congress needs, the Republicans need to get a Speaker of the House in there. I would quite frankly approach it this way, and that is, I got to be pragmatic, you know, and a lot depends upon where the Senate is, but if you've got that close of margin in the House, you cannot give control of your agenda away to 8 people that want to disrupt it and want to create chaos. And so I would tell the leadership of the House, we want to have an agenda item, and we will work, we will get Democrat votes as we need to make sure we can get the agenda passed. And so I want it to be conservative. I want to make sure that it solves problems. but it doesn't have to be 100% pure with all Republican votes. We can actually go after the other votes as well.
Thank you for that.
I hate to keep using Reagan analogies, but what I loved about him, that he was a consistent conservative, but whenever he got elected, Tip O'Neill was head of the Democratic Congress, and Reagan wanted to get his economic package through. And so he worked with Tip O'Neill and said, let's get it done. And they worked together, and that pragmatism is necessary to solve the problems of America. You do that here in New Hampshire. I did it in Little Rock. We need to do it there. All right. Yes, young people.
Hi, Governor Hutchinson. I'm a junior at the Phillips Exeter Academy, and I'm actually from Orange County, California, but I come here during the school year. And I was in 8th grade during COVID, and it really frustrated me to see how schools in California were shut down for much longer than medically required, anything required, and to see people on the opposite side of the spectrum talk about education inequality and the education crisis to shut down schools for that long and harm the people who have already been harmed the most. And I see states like Iowa and Arizona and Florida enacting school choice programs, and I think that's really a path forward for educational equality by putting the money back in parents' hands. So I wanted to ask, would you favor a national school choice voucher programs to help make this policy accessible nationwide, including in states where teachers' unions have a big lock on the state government?
Great question, and there's two parts to that I want to answer. But the last part is about school choice. And I support school choice. We just passed that legislation in Arkansas. I work for it as governor, but Governor Sanders, my successor, actually got it through the legislature, signed it into law, and so everybody has school choice, whatever your zip code is. So I believe in that. This is a matter that should be left to the states, so I don't want to pass a national law. There can be some incentives, there could be some encouragement, but this is a matter state by state that should decide in the realm of education as to what kind of education system they're going to have. Now, I do want to answer, you didn't raise this as a question, but you made the point, the frustrations in California about schools closing, and I just want to tell you, we didn't do that in Arkansas. In Arkansas, you remember the pandemic came, COVID came in March of 2020. And you couldn't keep the schools open then because parents were afraid. They didn't want to send their children there. And so everybody went virtual. It didn't take us long in a rural state to recognize that this is not working for the students. And so I said, we're going back to school in the fall for in-classroom instruction. Teachers are going to be there and students are going to be there. And of course, nationally, the cases went up. There was protests out there, there was pressure, and most of the states closed their schools. And I said, no, we got to keep them open for in-classroom instruction. It turned out to be one of the best decisions that I made for the students, for their social benefit, and for the communities. And the result was that Arkansas, there's been a study that we rank number 2 in the nation in terms of days of in-classroom instruction during the pandemic. And I must add that we were ahead of Florida and Texas. Y'all laugh at that. That's competition that you can have as governor. Thank you. Thank you. Great question. Yes, sir.
With so many people running for president and Trump having a solid base, how do you get attention to yourself? I mean, shouldn't someone tell the voters, the emperor's got no clothes, and say he might not be mentally fit?
Well, first of all, the great hope for America is Iowa and New Hampshire. And I'm here in New Hampshire, so the great hope and responsibility of the future of our country rests upon you. And it's partly the candidates, and I'm making my case. You heard me already make my case against a Trump policy that would be disastrous for America. And I've been very clear and outspoken. In the first debate, where I was really the only one that sat there with clear eyes and said, I'm not going to support Donald Trump if he's a convicted felon. And that's not a very high bar to get over, but it would seem like I was in a rather unique position at that time. And so there's certain things that candidates will do, and I'm doing that. But it's up to the voters of this state to determine what kind of leadership that we want, both that will define the Republican Party and, if elected, define the future of our country. What kind of a country we want to have. And so it's up to the voters, and I'm making the case, and the media wants to narrow this very quickly. They don't like having 8 candidates, 9 candidates out there. They want to narrow it, and they want to do it very quickly. I like what others have said, and we need to narrow it, but let's let New Hampshire vote first. And so I'm going to your communities. I'm addressing you in town hall meetings. If you invite me into your home, I'll be there. Hopefully you can get your neighbors to come. Otherwise, we'll just have a good glass of tea. But I'm going to be there, and that's where I'm counting on you to make good decisions. And if you disagree with me, then you won't hear from me again. But I believe this is important, and I'll make my case that Donald Trump's not the right leader for our party and our country. Let's see. Right over here. Yes, sir. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Some of the other candidates are all in favor of getting rid of some of the departments, like the Department of Education and all that. What's your thoughts on that?
If they passed a law, Congress did, that we're going to abolish the Department of Education, then I'll sign it. Because we can work through that. That's primarily a state function. You still have Pell Grants that have to be administered. Somebody's got to do it. You've got student loan programs. You've got, Title IX resources that helps us in our schools. And so there's work that has to be done, but if we can do that in other ways. But I want to focus on things that can be done and can be done quickly. And, whenever I was governor of Arkansas, I had 42 different departments of government that reported to me. 42. If you gave each department head an hour, it would consume all of my time, just an hour a week. I reformed state government from 42 down to 15 departments. I reorganized it. I managed it. I had a cabinet that could work more functionally. And the result was we reduced state government employment by 3,000 workers. We didn't fire anybody. We just did that through attrition. That's the approach I have at the federal government level. I want to control the administrative state so that we make sure that regulations that are passed are consistent with the intent of Congress and doesn't overly burden our citizens. I want to make sure that we have managers, the Department of Education and other places that carry out that agenda of reducing the regulatory burden on our schools and giving our local school boards more freedom to manage their money. Whenever the federal government they cover 10% of all education spending in the country, 10%, but they control 90% of the policy. Let's reverse that. Let's let the local school districts control policy. So that's my objective, and that's what I'll focus on. And you've got candidates that says they want to reduce federal employment by 75%. The Border Patrol you're going to have to invest in. You've got, 5,000 civilian workers at Portsmouth Naval Shipyards. What would that do to the economy here if you gutted them? And it would certainly do a lot in gutting our national defense posture. So I believe in a conservative approach, reducing the size of government and the regulatory burden, but we got work to do. Let's reform it, let's get it done well, and let's make smart decisions in federal government.
Would you have a bunch of executive orders lined up, though?
Yeah, the first one would be to reverse a lot of the executive orders of Joe Biden. And I say that very specifically. He's got directives from the Department of Labor that that businesses and retirement funds need to invest in, they can invest in ESG priorities, the social agendas out there. And even though it says may invest, When the federal government says may, everybody interprets that as shall. So that's one of those things I'd want to do away with. In terms of executive orders, I'm going to do one for the future of Social Security and Medicaid. I'm going to have an executive order for review of all federal law enforcement agencies. I have a very specific plan on that. And that will start from day one, that we're going to have charters in federal law enforcement that says we're going to protect civil liberties. We're going to refine the jurisdiction of the FBI. We're going to strengthen the drug enforcement role of the DEA. So there's a lot of work to be done, and that can be done from the executive branch. And then I will do an executive order that says we're going to give a directive to reduce the non-defense workforce by 200,000 workers. That's a 10% reduction. Some people say that's not enough, but I think it's a really good start to get a handle on things. And then I will do an executive order whenever it comes to the energy supplies in our country. So if we can resurrect the Keystone Pipeline, which might not be done, but I would want to do that. And then secondly, President Biden canceled the oil leases from the Alaskan slope. This is after leases have been made. I will immediately open those lands back up for leasing so we can produce oil and we can get the price down at the pump. Those are a couple of things I'll do. These are a great question, thank you. And then we had a question back here. I was thinking I saw somebody's hand.
I don't see one back there, but actually Governor Howard had a question for you on Israel, which you began your remarks with. I'll give the mic over to Howard.
Well, we've obviously all been watching what's been unfolding in Israel with a sense of horror and heartbreak. And I know as governor and when you were in Congress, you visited Israel numerous times. And what should we be doing as Americans, and as how should the world respond to this?
Well, thank you, and it's on everyone's mind, so it's the right conversation that we have about Israel. And war is too visual, particularly when you see the atrocities that we have seen displayed on our TV screens over the last few days. And it's like taking the world back 500 years. To some dark point in our history. And Israel needs to do what they've got to do, and we know what they're going to do, and we will support them. We've got to eliminate Hamas. They're the ones that caused this horror, and they are set on the destruction of not just Israel, but the Jewish people, and that has to end. So that's the key. And we've got to stand with Israel. I heard President Biden speak today, address the nation in his first time after 2 days on the subject of Israel. And he said, we've lost 14 Americans now. We have some that are hostage. He talked about the deployment of our ships there and the support that we're giving. What he did not, and he was good comments about the horror of what we've seen and that we will stand with Israel. But what he didn't talk about was Iran. And Iran's a player. They are complicit in this. It's really undisputed. And that doesn't mean there's any evidence that, the $6 billion that was released, they haven't received that yet. But we know that they give $100 million a year to Hamas and Hezbollah, two terrorist organizations. They fund them. And then there's the Wall Street Journal story that you've got, Hamas meeting with the Iranian leadership and got approval for this raid and got support for it and authorization for it. Now, we'll see if that's confirmed by the intelligence, which I don't have access to. But Iran's fingerprints are all over this, and that has to be addressed. And we need to work with Israel as to how to properly respond to it, and you have to take it a step at a time. The first one is the immediate need to rid ourselves of that threat of Hamas. And if Israel needs material, we've got to be there. I'll add one more thing, that Congress has got to have a Speaker of the House. There's urgent things going on, and they've got to stay in there. I'm tired of people going home for breaks when there's urgent matters to address. And so don't break, don't go home. Be like the election of the Pope in the Catholic Church. Stay there till you see the smoke rise, and let's elect a speaker. But then there's going to have to, and the president said we're going to submit a bill for aid to Israel, an appropriation bill. And we know there's going to be an appropriation bill for Ukraine. They're going to try to combine those together. And I support both, but I think they ought to be separated. Let's make the case for our support for Israel, and let's make the case separately for what we want to support Ukraine. But let's divide those up and get those through. And you can always argue about the amount and what it is, but that's the way that Congress has to show the support for Israel in a very tangible way. Yes, ma'am.
How would you treat the southern border?
She can just use mine.
How would you treat the southern border? Would you do anything different with immigration?
I would. And the key challenge with the southern border is that President Biden opened it up. And we all know that. You know, he said on the first day, we're going to stop construction of the wall, and we're going to reverse the former president's policies. And no matter what he says since then, the only thing people have heard is the border is open. And he's tried to reverse policy. He said he's going to restart the wall. And it comes out of his mouth, and it has no credibility, and so they keep coming. So the next president, I will send a clear message that is unequivocal and that will be consistent that our border is closed. Now, I support immigration. I have some unique ideas in immigration. We have to have a lawful flow here. We need them. They add to the vibrancy of our democracy. And I support that lawful flow of immigrants. But we're a sovereign country, and we cannot demonstrate unlawfulness to the world. And so one, it would be a clear, consistent signal. I would ask Congress, and that would be one of the first things I did, is submit a border security bill that would add resources there, both to our processing of asylum claims, so we're not catching them and then releasing them and expect them to show up 4 years later. That will change. The Border Patrol will have the support they need, and we will continue to build the infrastructure that will not just be the wall, but it will also be other technologies that support that wall and to make it effective. The solution is not just the wall. I was there, and the cutouts in the wall where the cartels come and use an acetylene torch and cut a hole in it and go through. I saw the visual of them, you know, throwing a grappling hook over the wall and climbing up just like a military exercise and over. It's all about the barrier, and then it's the response capability, and that takes technology and it takes people. The next thing, of course, is my foreign policy, while we're protecting, you know, supporting Israel, and while we're worried about China, I would go back to what President George W. Bush said, that U.S. foreign policy needs to look south. And we have got to spend time in Latin America making sure that we are building allies there, that we are getting their support for changing the mass immigration that we're seeing coming not just from Mexico, but from Venezuela, from Ecuador, and so many different countries there that are hurting. We've got to address that. And so I would be going to meet with the President Obrador and say, you'd better help us on going after the cartels. Now, I know I'm giving a very long answer here, but it's a very important question. And I'm frustrated as a governor that you've got governors, and I sent National Guard to the border. President Biden said we don't want them. You had Governor Abbott build the water barrier. If I was president, I would call my Border Patrol in and say, why didn't you think of this? I mean, it's a good idea. And what does President Biden do? He sues the governor of Texas and saying, you don't have the authority to do it. I would call the governors in, Democrat and Republicans, and saying, we're going to work together. And that's what we did when I was in charge of border security. I worked on the Arizona Border Control Initiative in partnership with local law enforcement and with the governor of that state. And we worked in partnership trying to solve a very difficult problem that impacts all of our border states and New Hampshire as well, which is a border state. And so that's a long list of things, but they're all very important, and it's probably the most fundamental question and responsibility the next president will have. Yes.
Hello. I have two questions. So bear with me. A new United Nations report says that it is possible to hold global warming to relatively safe levels, but doing so will require global cooperation, billions of dollars, and big changes. What will you do to ensure that all of our children will inherit a world without catastrophic climate change? And may I ask the second question, or do you want to answer that first?
Let me answer that because it would help me. So first of all, y'all remember that first debate, there was a question that was asked, do you believe that climate change is in part caused by human behavior? Who raised the hand? I was the only one out of 8 candidates that raised the hand. And then the whole conversation got shifted. Governor DeSantis jumped in and said, that's not a fair question. We ought to be talking about something else. And we lost the whole conversation on an important topic. Now, so it's individual responsibility. What are we doing in our families, in our communities, to make sure that we recycle and that we reduce the use of plastics and that we take the steps to reduce CO2 emissions. So it's about individual responsibility. And as a government, we're moving to cleaner production of energy. I will say that we're moving too quickly on electric vehicles, and that I want to change the strict criteria on timelines for that shift. We want to make the consumers have a little bit more voice in that, and we want to improve the technology so that it works better and to give it time. So we have too strict of timelines there. So we'll slow some of those deadlines down, but it is still something that we will focus on as a country. I believe in clean air, and I believe in the pristine environment, and that we are, as God's children, stewards of this environment, and we do have a responsibility. The second part of your question.
With all due respect, Governor, recycling plastic is not going to change our course. We are heading towards catastrophic climate change. By 2050, many cities in the world will be unlivable. Lahore in Pakistan, many of the Middle Eastern countries, the south of the United States. So I understand. Thank you for telling us that individually we can make a change, but it's not correct.
Good.
All right. So the next question is, firearms were involved in more child deaths in the U.S. in 2020 and 2021 than any other causes. What will you do to protect our children from having to practice active shooter drills in schools, fear for their safety, and help them believe that they will be able to safely grow up?
Well, in terms of school safety, as governor, I initiated a study of school safety, brought in the experts. I've actually done that at a national level called the National School Shield Initiative, made recommendations on how we can better secure our schools. I know that's not what direction you're going, but that is very, very important. And our children are so adaptable. Whenever I was going to school, we had drills in which we were having to protect against an atomic attack. You have tornado drills. And so today, to have active shooter drills is not what we want our children to have and experience in life, but they are adaptable. The most important thing is parents need to know that their children are safe whenever they drop them off for school. And so we have to invest in the school security. Secondly, it's about the mental health of our students. In Arkansas, we had our school counselors that play a very important role, but they were spending 90% of their time on administrative work and not direct counseling. So we passed a law that reversed that and said they have to spend 90% of their time in direct counseling with students. And then we require schools to have threat response capability and to make sure they had audits on their school safety. And we put money behind it. And so that's what you need to do to protect the schools. Now, if you're looking at some of them that will say we need to have a higher level of regulation of firearms, I applaud the two U.S. senators, one from New Jersey, a Democrat, and one from, maybe it was Connecticut, I'm sorry, Senator Murphy, and then Senator Cornyn, that after the Uvalde shooting, they had a solution to address a gap in who can get firearms and in reference to the juvenile records that might be violent. And it passed. And so I want to look at everything. Does it make a difference in the safety of our people, and will it cause lives to be saved? Everything should be on the table, consistent with our Second Amendment privileges and rights. But I'm not taking away firearms from our citizens. And so, and I actually thought of that in Israel. I don't know if anybody else thought of it, but whenever you saw the terrorists invading the homes, slaughtering those people, my thought was, if I was a dad in that home, give me a gun. I would want to protect my family. And so I do think that is an important part of our life and freedoms in America. Okay. Yes. Then we'll go back there.
Thank you again for being here. You've mentioned a number of government initiatives and programs. I think you get a lot of wide support among this group for various parts of it. But the reality is those all cost resources. They all take money. And if you think about those high school juniors over there, they've never seen a balanced budget.
Yeah.
So my question is, at the end of the second term, 8 years, what would the federal budget deficit be under your administration?
Under the end of my second term?
Yeah.
The budget would be balanced. You know, and I actually, everybody likes to have a slogan in a campaign. So one I came up with was debt-free in 33. Doesn't have a great ring to it. It sounds like a church bond payoff program. But the problem was all the economists says it's impossible. And that's, we're talking about a $33 trillion debt. Now, a balanced budget is a different issue. Now, first, the last time we balanced a budget in this country was when I was in the Congress. That was 20 years ago, a long time ago. But we did balance the budget. And it happened because, one, we controlled spending. Actually, Bill Clinton said the age of big government is over. He didn't really mean it, but we put some of that to work. And then we also grew our private sector of our economy. So my strategy for balancing the budget, and it'll take some time, is one, you submit your budget on time and make Congress do their work. And it starts with the president submitting his budget on time. Secondly, you've got to be able to use the control of the pen and stop the spending from the executive branch basis. And so if you have to veto a bill, you're going to have to veto a bill. And then you're going to, like I said, I've set the goal of reducing the federal non-defense workforce by 10%, 200,000 workers. That sets the right model for saving money. You're going to have to look at Medicaid. In Medicaid, I have a simple idea, and that is a partnership of federalism, where I give Governor Sununu here more flexibility in managing the Medicaid program in the state. For example, right now, I could not put in a work requirement, which I tried to do in Arkansas, that if you're able-bodied, and you don't have small children at home, then you have to work, or you have to be in worker training, or you have to volunteer. The Biden administration struck that down. And so we're going to change that to give the states more flexibility to manage those programs, and it slows the growth of it. So those are a couple of things, and it's going to be challenging because we do need to invest in our military preparedness. We do have to make sure we can control the border, and I've said we've got to put more immigration officers there. So you got to be realistic as to the challenge, but it can be done. And a key part of that is growing the private sector. When I was governor, we had a 7% income tax rate in Arkansas. And I said, we've got to lower the income tax rate. And people said, you can't do that if you're going to wind up cutting services. And they said, you're going to be like Kansas, you cut taxes too fast. We did it gradually, and from 7% down to 4.9%. That's $700 million every year that went from the government coffers back to the taxpayers. And what that does, though, is it spurs the industry on. You reduce regulation, you grow the private sector, and I had a fundamental goal as governor that I will have as president. And that is, I want the private sector of our economy to grow faster than the government sector. Simple principle. But whenever you have the private sector growing, all of a sudden, you are able to have revenues in to move toward a balanced budget. So those are a couple of very specific ideas that I'll implement.
And this has been quite interesting, and I'm sorry to jump in here, but we are running out of time. I know you get one more question, and then we're going to have you do closing remarks.
Okay, all right. Oh, yes, sir, you were next. Yes, thank you.
Good evening, Governor. Just last week, all eyes were locked in on the peace deal being brokered between Israel and Saudi Arabia, in which Saudi Arabia would recognize the statehood of Israel. The current administration has designated Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO U.S. ally. As president, can you support a government headed by Mohammed bin Salman, who ordered the murder and torture of Jamal Khashoggi, also a government who funded 9/11?
I was there in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, after 9/11, setting up the first visa security office. And so I understand the risk. You've got to be pragmatic. And they don't have to be our closest ally, but they can be a strategic partner if they accept the existence of Israel, and that they can be a partner for peace strategically in that region. And so that's where the practical real world comes in. I'm not trying to make every Arab country like America or like our democracy. I understand they have different practices there, but I do want them to push for more respect of women and women's rights, both in, and that was a problem in departing from Afghanistan, but even in Saudi Arabia, they've got to make more progress, obviously. And so if they can be a counterbalance to Iran, then we need to take advantage of any relationship that we can build there. Great question, thank you. So first of all, this has been terrific. This is what I want to do in your home here in New Hampshire, to meet your neighbors and answer questions. That's how you win races. But you've got to be transparent. You've got to be say what you believe in, because New Hampshire, you can see right through it if you don't. So I would love to ask for your support in this campaign. It's asa2024.com, and I hope that you can go there and stay in touch with our campaign and show support for us and recognize how important your responsibility is. And it's not, maybe it's a little bit of overstatement, but whenever you're the first in the nation, the responsibility lies on you. Whenever I have an event here in New Hampshire and people drive from other states to come here because they want to have your experience, that should show you what lies on your shoulders. And so I'm asking for your support tonight. I want to thank USA Today for hosting this and giving me this chance to make my case. And Howard, thank you again for your support and lesson in history that you gave. And let's end with Abraham Lincoln, as he was here in this auditorium making the case that a divided nation cannot stand. Today, a divided nation is hard to stand. And so let's heal our land. Let's stand together for our democracy and for our freedoms and for the support of our allies. Thank you very much.
And one last message for everyone here. The governor will stick around for a few minutes if you want to talk with him or ask any additional questions. But thank you so much for everyone who watched at home. Please continue to join us throughout the week for these candidate forums. Thank you very much. Have a good night.